Greetings, everyone. I'm Chuck Friedman. I am the chair of the Department of Learning Health Sciences at the University of Michigan, and one of the two co-chairs, along with Doug Van Houweling, of the LHS Collaboratory. We're very delighted about today's session, which is the second session that the Collaboratory and the University of Michigan School of Dentistry have sponsored together. Excuse me. And let me begin by, in addition to welcoming you, to just provide a few housekeeping details about today's session. Sorry. First of all, this session is being closed captioned and recorded. The link to the recorded session will be shared with all attendees and registrants via the LHS Collaboratory website. We very much hope to have a lively discussion today, including audience Q&A. There is a Q&A option on your Zoom screen, so please enter your questions into that Zoom Q&A pod. As I mentioned, today's program is the second of what we hope to be an ongoing biannual joint event between the LHS Collaboratory and the University of Michigan School of Dentistry. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Lori McCauley, who will formally begin this session. Dr. McCauley is Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs of the University of Michigan. And prior to that appointment as Provost, she served as the Dean of the School of Dentistry at the University of Michigan. And she's the William K. and Mary Ann Najjar Professor of Periodontics in the Dental School, and also holds a position as Professor of Pathology in the Medical School. At the university, she chaired the Department of Periodontics and Oral Medicine, led several campus efforts in campaign planning, professional standards, and pandemic planning. She's been a champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, receiving the Ida Great Award for her outstanding efforts in promoting multicultural ideals. As Dean of the School of Dentistry, she actively worked to reduce student debt and oversaw a $142 million expansion and renovation of the dental school's clinical and educational facilities. And notably for this session, she established as Dean a Learning Health Systems initiative across the School of Dentistry. So Lori, thank you for being here today, and let me pass the virtual podium over to you.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I'm really pleased to be here with all of you at the second Collaborative University of Michigan Medical Dental Learning Health Systems Conference. That was a great introduction. What you didn't say about me is that I love data, and participating in an event that's founded on the principles of cross-disciplinarity, collaboration, and data science is really a treat for me. First, I would like to thank those who made this day possible. You've already met Dr. Chuck Friedman, Department Chair of Learning Health Sciences. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you to your team for putting this event together. I would also like to thank Dr. Alex De Silva, who you will meet shortly, Director of Learning Health Systems and Associate Professor in the School of Dentistry, and thank his team as well. Alex, your vision and dedication to this work is really impressive. Importantly, I would like to thank Dr. Larry Tabak, Director of the National Institutes of Health, who will be giving our keynote today and who we will introduce shortly. As Chuck mentioned, I serve as Provost at the University of Michigan, and I'm also a dentist, and as he said, former Dean of the Dental School. So I'm deeply invested in the aspirations behind this conference. Data analytics can apprise us of new problems and fresh perspectives on familiar ones. When we see problems and patterns emerge from data, solutions usually take two forms. technology, and culture change. More often than not, we discover that a technical solution alone, no matter how elegant, will not solve our problems unless it's coupled with a paradigm shift. We sometimes use the term culture change to refer to things we wish our patients would do differently. For instance, when a patient reschedules an appointment repeatedly, only to postpone it indefinitely, we talk about a culture change that promotes personal agency and advocacy for one's own health. Through that lens, a failure to follow a course of care is framed as a shortcoming on the patient's side. In fact, how can they establish good health when they are not present for appointments? As patient-centered leaders in medical fields, we have the responsibility to dig deeper. So we do. We ask why a patient abandons a course of care. We examine our systems critically and ask what systemic changes we can make to encourage individuals to pursue health-promoting behaviors. In many cases, this is how we discover the shape of inequities in our healthcare system, as well as deficits in the diversity or the management of our data. In the process of self-reflection, we rightfully ask ourselves how our own culture must evolve. In other words, the culture of the practitioner, in order to meet the needs of the entire population we serve. We're here today, reaching across disciplines to forge a more collaborative, data-driven future where information sharing and cross-disciplinarity are the norm. Ultimately, the promise of this work is a more equitable healthcare system and a higher standard of care for all. Grappling with these challenges and opportunities on a national scale is no easy feat. No one knows this better than Dr. Larry Tabak, Director of the National Institutes of Health. And I'm really thrilled and honored to welcome Larry to speak with us today. Before taking the lead at NIH, Dr. Tabak served as the Principal Deputy Director and the Deputy Ethics Counselor of NIH. Before that, Acting Principal Deputy Director of NIH. And before that, as Director of the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research for 10 years. I had the good fortune to serve on the NIDCR Council during Larry's tenure as Director and witnessed firsthand his wisdom and his astute leadership skills. I'll just say he was and still is a role model for me. Prior to joining the NIH, Dr. Tabak was the Senior Associate Dean for Research and Professor of Dentistry and Biochemistry and Biophysics in the School of Medicine and Dentistry at the University of Rochester in New York. A former NIH merit recipient, Dr. Tabak's major research focus has been on the structure, biosynthesis, and function of glycoproteins. He continues this work in this area, maintaining an active research laboratory within the NIH intramural program, in addition to his administrative duties. It's truly impressive. Larry received his undergraduate degree from City College of New York, his DDS from Columbia, and a PhD from the University of Buffalo. Among his many honors, he's an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine. We are incredibly fortunate to hear from this dental colleague and leader of the largest medical research organization in the world. But before we hear from Dr. Tabak, I will turn the proceedings over to Dr. Da Silva, who will tell us what we can look forward to in the remainder of the program. Thank you for joining us, and I'm delighted to be able to participate today. Alex, to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Laurie McCauley. And so let me just share my screen here. So thank you very much, Laurie, for really for your remarks for this event. And we are very honored by this collaborative between the medical school, the Department of Learning Health Systems, and also the School of Dentistry. Together, we have created this event that really integrate both areas. And but first, what's learning health systems? And the organization that works, that continues self-improves and adapt data, analytics, and health technology to engage stakeholders, implement and optimizing care, education, and research. So it is not only technology, but also the behavior, as Provost Macaulay mentioned. It's how we can innovate in these two areas and also change the culture to improve our system. This event was created with this mindset, integrate medical and dental. The first one that was 2 years ago was with the keynote speaker from the World Health Organization, with Chief Information Officer from the WHO. In that time, we look at the digital health at a global level. The challenge that you had to improve our care to our community, to our patients, problems that we had at a country, at a continent, and how to move on against those problems, to integrate those systems, to share data, to integrate things. And here we have something that is the next stage. We are looking hands-on the frontiers in data sharing. We have Dr. Tabak, the director of the National Institutes of Health, to tell us the future in data analytics. Not only sharing, but also integrate that. What are the things that the policies that were just under effect this year, for example, and that is change our culture. One thing that he recently mentioned, data sharing equals good science. So because of him being the director of NIH and also a dentist and a researcher, he's the perfect keynote speaker for this event. With that, I will leave the virtual stage with Dr. Tabak. Thank you very much for your presence with us. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both Provost Macaulay and Dr. De Silva for what are very generous, overly generous comments, and I really do appreciate them. I should make a comment about my actual title, which is performing the duties of the NIH director. As you all know, somebody dear to Michigan, Francis Collins, stepped down as director of NIH in December of 2021. And as his principal deputy, I assumed responsibility for the agency as the then acting director. There is something called the Vacancies Act, which says that after 220 days, you're not allowed to have somebody in an acting role who is in a presidentially appointed Senate confirmed position. And so at that point, my title changed to performing the duties of the NIH director. And it is in that capacity that I join you this morning. But again, thank you all for the very kind introductions. So if I can have the next slide, please. I hope to cover really 3 things with you this morning. Spend a little time talking about what NIH has been doing to support open data sharing policies. Dr. De Silva sort of summarized the key element to that. Sharing data is good science, and that really undergirds everything that we think about in this space. Then I would like to spend some time exploring the promise of data analytics. Indeed, I will posit that data is the new oil. some of you may be old enough to remember the film, The Graduate, and the famous punchline in that film was, what's the next great thing? And the answer was plastics. If you were to do a remake of that film today, the next great thing it would not be plastics. Indeed, it would be data. And then I'd like to touch upon specific issues related to the interoperability of data across dental and medical care, a continuum for sure at the University of Michigan, but sadly not the case in many institutions around the country. And then finally, because Dr. McCauley, indicated her love for data, something that we all know about her, I thought we'd have a little fun and do a very high-level portfolio analysis of the University of Michigan in terms of their research efforts supported by NIH, as just a sort of a case study of one of the many, many things, of course, you can do with data analytics. So with that as a sort of the introduction, if I can have the next slide, please. So we'll start with the NIH support for open data sharing policies. If we can have the next slide, please. So as you have heard in the introductory remarks, we feel very, very strongly that sharing of data is integral to advancing the NIH mission. And obviously, it does many, many things, and we've just outlined a few of those in this chart. Obviously, data sharing sparks new collaboration. It also will enhance your study design. As people look at your data, they come up with new ideas about how you might be able to do things better. Data sets that are of great value get to be reused over and over again, really squeezing the maximum value out of the data. It allows you to look at data in new ways in terms of the combinations and permutations that investigators will begin to work through. In an era where we have to ensure the reproducibility of science, certainly data sharing facilitates the validation of any study. And of course, ultimately, it stimulates new ways of looking at research. I'm fond of saying that the real advances of science don't come from traditional disciplines necessarily, but rather at the interfaces of those traditional disciplines. And by sharing of data, particularly across and among different disciplines, you really do stimulate those interfacial opportunities. So you want to maximize the data collection by reducing redundancy. If I've already done a study and it hasn't been published yet, it would be great for somebody else to know that so that they don't waste resources repeating what I've already done. It does increase the stewardship, both in terms of transparency and accountability. And then the most important point is it speeds the research enterprise in a very serious way. And that, of course, is central to everything that we do at NIH. So if I can have the next slide, please. So I think everybody agrees on maximizing the value of data. Very, very few people vote against that principle. The question is, how do you get there? And it's not, just bytes and bits. It's also about people, which has already been referred to in some of the introductory comments. The data, of course, are catalyzing all of the breakthroughs, all of the discoveries, but it's the integrated policies, resources, and infrastructure that really allow and enable a responsible sharing and reuse of those data so that you squeeze every bit out of the effort. And of course, our goal is to promote effective data sharing as the rule and not the exception. You know, there's effective January 25th of last month. There are two basic requirements: submission of a data management and sharing plan for all NIH supported research, and compliance with any institute, center, or office approved plan. And so whether you're in the extramural programs or the intramural programs, all of this is now part of what we expect, and we believe will be very important in ultimately maximizing the value of our data. Okay, if we go to the next slide, please. So again, the goals are laid out here, and the question is, how do you get there? So we all know about collecting data. We certainly know about the curation and the analysis. Publication and sharing is still a work in progress for some. We are working hard at, in addition to sharing your data through publication, by doing it through alternate means. During the pandemic, the use of preprint servers became quite the norm, and we were able to really see the power of rapid informal communication, if you will. How data is stored is very important. Is it stored in an accessible way? And then, of course, there's the access issue. And each of these elements has got to be addressed. And whilst it's true that what works for one university may not necessarily work for another, that in terms of the operationalizing of this, the general principles are ones that hopefully we all can agree to, and we all can, implement. So if we go to the next one, please. So let's talk a little bit about some of the promise of data analytics. If you go to the next slide, please. So data really are the new oil. And I just would like to draw to your attention what we're doing at NIH. We have a partnership with AWS, Google Cloud Services, and Azure. And as a result, we've made really, I think, important progress in our ability to store, manage, share, and use data through cloud technologies. The science and technology research infrastructure that we have laid out to foster discovery, experimentation, and sustainability is multifaceted. It includes a state-of-the-art data storage capability, as well as the ability to compute against those data. We are offering broadly training and education for researchers, particularly in terms of cloud operation. We are, of course, employing, as are many institutions around the world, innovative technologies such as AI and ML. But also we are providing engineering and technical support, both internally and externally, through the STRIDES arraignment. We're making available now, as the chart indicates, over 200 petabytes of data on 3 cloud platforms. And the different flavors of those data are just summarized in the surrounding elements to this slide. You can see it ranges from gene expression and variant analyses to cryo-electron microscopic images. It ranges from neuronal image analysis to single-cell omics analyses, and all of these data and beyond are available. And so with the ability to access these types of data. What it does is it really says to the data science community, biomedical research is now entered the big data era. I remember vividly about 15 years or so ago, I had occasion to talk to the provosts and vice chancellors of the University of California system. And I was asked, in addition, to give an update on NIH, to sort of blue sky a little bit. And at that time, I laid out what I thought was a pretty bold vision for the use of so-called big data. And there were some chuckles in the audience. And while I don't mind getting a laugh or two, I hadn't said anything that I thought was funny. And so I sort of questioned the audience, like, what did they find humorous? It turns out that several of them were astrophysicists, and they chuckled at my notion that somehow life sciences would be part of the big data revolution, when of course astrophysicists, really have been at the vanguard of big data. Well, fast forward these 15 years, and I have to say, I think we've arrived in terms of biomedical research, and you were all part of that, and an important part. If I can go to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples, and you actually may be familiar with these and certainly others. One of the things that we've been doing to probe the undergirding pathology in the so-called long COVID is through the Recover effort. We have been scraping electronic health record cohorts to do both adult and pediatric data assessments at a very large scale. And what is being ingested into this option is listed here. PCORnet, over 38 million records. N3C, over 16 million records. We've added 9,000 plus COVID cases from all of us. And among the many things that we've been able to do is we've been able to validate a so-called computable phenotype and the usage of ICD-10 codes for identifying long COVID. And we've also been able to identify various parameters related to incidence and prevalence and risk factors, the impact of variant and vaccinations. It has shown a light, of course, something that you're all familiar with the extraordinary health disparities that we've observed, as well as some beginnings of intervention. If you go to the next slide, please. One of the most recent questions that's been asked, and this is all through being able to assemble literally millions of electronic health records, is whether or not vaccination had any value in terms of mitigating risk of long COVID. And to really just summarize an enormous amount of data, as you can see, those vaccinated did enjoy a reduced risk of long COVID. Pre-COVID vaccine absolutely associated with reduced risk. And again, this is data using a machine learning model developed from the N3C data set. Next, please. Now, NIH really sees itself at the vanguard of promoting FHIR for research. There are different ways of approaching integration, but we have really found that to modernize our data ecosystem, FHIR seems to be a very good approach to integrate that clinical data, which particularly if you're in a school of dentistry, at least historically has been sort of sequestered away into the whole realm of biomedical research. So we're developing open source FHIR applications, for example, for people with multiple chronic conditions. We are supporting eMERGE, the Electronic Medical Records and Genomics Network, again, based on a FHIR schema. We are creating a FHIR compliant API, which will enable a more facile retrieval of standardized phenotype data from a number of large cohort studies. And with regard to at least some of the audience today from the School of Dentistry, the dental data exchange from HL7, which utilizes FHIR resources to define standards for what should be, and what I hope is, a bidirectional information exchange between medical and dental providers. That bidirectionality is something that's really important for this to work optimally. And whilst, you know, in the course of delivering dental treatment, you do, of course, need to understand the medical record very carefully. It's through efforts like this that one day, and perhaps that's already begun on your campus, physicians will be informed by the patient's oral health status as well. If I can have the next slide, please. So in addition to clinical data, there is a tremendous amount of activity in data integration analyses. For example, FaceBase, which is a resource for craniofacial researchers, curates data sets from both normal and abnormal craniofacial features using both human examples as well as animal models. To date, there are over 1,000 such data sets. They include both 2D and 3-dimensional imaging. It is accompanied by appropriate sequencing data, genome browser tracks, as well as, in some instances, single cell data. Over 200 publications and counting have been associated with the use of this resource. And as you can see from the pictorial, this really is designed to promote a broad multidisciplinary collaboration among individuals interested in craniofacial development, molecular genetics, genomics, certainly within the School of Dentistry. I'm sure both your orthodontics individuals and your oral and maxillofacial surgeons would find this of great value. And we support craniofacial and dental research by providing this platform, empowering scientists with the tools that they need to not only view, but also annotate and organize these data. The platform is set up to really facilitate data sharing and citation. And obviously, this is a really good way of ensuring that we have data reuse. And of course, when you do the data reuse, it also serves as a cross-check. And so this is just one example. If I can have the next slide, please. And here's some additional, and I borrowed this from Dr. Rena D'Souza, who's the director at NIDCR. Here are 3 additional examples of advances in dental data science. The first at the University of Washington, an observational study to look at risk factors for oral health in individuals with cystic fibrosis. And the data sets include surveys, quantitative interviews, as well as oral health data and pulmonary health data. And the goal here would be to help develop behavioral interventions that are aimed at promoting oral health in individuals with cystic fibrosis. At the University of Arizona, the research data repository, ReData, is really trying to accelerate the development of AI/ML based technologies to look at early oral cancer detection in resource settings that are not optimal, low resource settings. Obviously, this would help reduce morbidity and mortality. And just as a side note, which I'll probably come back to in a moment, but whenever we think about the data sets that we're using to train our algorithms, obviously, your algorithm is only as good as the data set that it trains on. And far too often, data sets that are not representative of the entire nation are used. They're convenience data sets, basically. They're the data that investigators are able to access and so forth. But when you do that, unfortunately, you can amplify inequity. You can amplify the potential for misdiagnosis. So it's critically important that as we think about the data sets that we're going to use for purposes such as this and others, that we use data sets that are as representative as possible of the entire nation. And then finally, I've already mentioned the Facebook Hub, this particular one at USC, and they're particularly using some curation with machine learning approaches to improve the metadata descriptive elements while retaining the restrictions on data handling. And so they're trying to thread that particular needle. Okay, if I can have the next slide, please. So everybody has fantasized about what wearable technologies will enable us to do in the future. Anybody who grew up, when science fiction television shows were on remembers the walkie-talkie watches and so forth. But of course, the biotechnology has gone way, way, way beyond any of that. This actually displays a real mapping set of efforts by Colgate-Palmolive, who are using the face guard, the mouth guard in the lower right corner of the slide. This is a smart device which is able to use a series of multispectral sensors to both capture data that is relevant to the condition of the oral environment. These data are then analyzed through AI to provide a better understanding of the current state of the oral tissue health and to measure quantitatively the changes in oral health. But it doesn't, each one of you can think of probably 5 more possibilities here, not the least of which would be putting sensors in to monitor impact for concussion, for example, or a way of tracking performance if you were involved in some sort of athletic opportunity and so forth. The old adage of the mouth is a mirror to the rest of the body has really grown up with efforts such as this one. If I have the next slide, please. And really, again, if you just think about it, in addition to things like a smart mouth guard, you could have a smart toothbrush, which could assess any number of things. That together with wrist oxygen monitors, which became quite prevalent during the pandemic. No reason for those to go away now. Smart watches, smart rings, and so forth. All of these things represent an opportunity to collect enormous amounts of physiologic data, behavioral data, et cetera, environmental data. And we are already taking advantage of some of these things. For example, in the All of Us program, where the smartwatch data has become integrated into what we are doing. If I could have the next slide, please. Well, I just, will highlight a few activities going forward. And again, I don't think any of these will be of surprise to anybody, but I think it's important to ensure that we're all sort of rowing in the same direction. We want to support capabilities that develop and adopt common services. We want more connectivity, not less. We really don't want to enable the building of data silos any longer, be that here at NIH or within the extramural community. As I had mentioned earlier about the need for heightened awareness of bias in the development of data science methods and tools, including AI and ML, we really have to integrate ethics and transparency to ferret out any potential biases. And it's really an important approach, not only for machine learning, but for all areas of data science. NIH will continue our acceleration towards the support of community-driven and open standardization methods, tools, and workflows to ensure interoperability of data that can be found, that can be accessed, and that can be reused. And then finally, and I know this is one that is shared by your organization. I think that we want to enhance our ability to share participant data in a way that preserves anonymity, in a way that streamlines researcher access to appropriately de-identified health and clinical data. Those in the meeting who are expert at this know, of course, far more about this than I do. But if the financial world has figured out how to use things like blockchain to do this, surely, we should not be too far behind to be able to preserve anonymity, but to be able to combine and mix and match and compute upon various data sets with that privacy ensured. And so, maybe someone on this call is already working on that. I'd be really interested to know that if that's the case. Okay, if I could have the next slide, please. So now, just to talk a little bit about the interoperability of dental and medical care. If I can have the next slide, please. So somewhere along the way, the head was somehow dissociated from the rest of the body. And what we really want to do here is we want to put the head back on the rest of the body, both figuratively and of course, metaphorically. And there are efforts underway, such as the Dental Data Exchange from HL7, which is using the FHIR resource set to define standards for the bidirectional exchange. I can think of no single thing that would be more important as individuals are refreshing their electronic health records. And, if whether you use a vendor or you're using your homegrown system, that's your own business. But this integration, I think, is so very, very, very important. If I can have the next slide, please. Obviously, the using one common platform makes a lot of sense. It allows for health data exchange, and it also allows you to aggregate data from multiple EHRs and to make that available for either research purposes or population health trends within your own organization. There's just many, many values added to this. If I can have the next slide, please. Now, this may be out of date. I'll let the University of Michigan speak to this, but at least the last time we looked, those that have already done this are listed to the left, those installing also listed to the left, but that's out of 70 dental schools and counting. And so we need to somehow convince all schools of dentistry, particularly those that are associated with schools of medicine or osteopathy, that they need to, embark on this journey. And my hope is that those institutions that have already done it or are in the middle of doing it will serve as great role models for this purpose. If I can have the next slide, please. So again, just to a little philosophy. We view care equality as being a multi-stakeholder initiative, which really operates a trusted exchange network, a common agreement among the governing health information exchange networks. And we want to do this on a nationwide scale, ultimately. And the trust really boils down to the need for common trust agreement, common policy requirements, common technical specs, and a governance process that everybody buys into. And I know that we're still a long ways from this in terms of an aspirational goal, but I really do hope that it is an aspirational goal. First at local institutions, then, regionally, or among institutions that are like-minded, ultimately, of course, across the nation. If I can have the next slide, please. So the Big Mouth Data Dental Repository, this is data from 11 dental schools that was established first in 2012, about 4.6 million patients, quarterly data updates, and it does allow query interface for non-technical users to go across all institutions. One institution has added medical electronic record data to Big Mouth. And as you can see, there's about 25% of the patients overlap. I hope this is the very beginning of a trend that moves us all into this direction, where all the institutions that have agreed to share data do so not only with dental data, oral health data, but also with all forms of medical data. Next, please. Again, a slide that I have borrowed from the NIDCR, just outlining a number of the partnerships that they have engaged in. This is a priority area for the Dental Institute. And these are some examples of secondary data analyses using integrated medical and dental data sets. And so obviously, ResDac has been able to obtain access to CMS data for this purpose, the Wisconsin Collaborative, and then OCHIN. All of these are great examples of being able to do this. Okay, in the remaining time, if I can go to the next slide, please. I just want to have a little fun to share some data with you that I asked my team to do, to look at the amazing NIH portfolio of the University of Michigan. Dr. McCauley, this is in honor of your new role as provost, where you have to worry about the entire institution. And I thought I'd like to give you a bird's eye view of what really speaks to the strength of your organization. So if I can go to the next slide, please. So this hairball diagram represents a number of nodes that we are able to classify all NIH research project grant awards. And we have compiled them for all of NIH from fiscal year 18 through 22. The color of each node, the sort of circles, reflects the corresponding number of the awards from 18 to 22. The darker the node, the greater the number. And the lines between the nodes or the edges reflect the connectiveness between the topics. So if something is thicker, the content similarity is greater. If something is thin, it is less. And in general, things to the right of the center are more clinically relevant, and things to the left of the center are more basic. Now, again, many topics, and most institutions wouldn't be represented in, even maximum of these things. But let's go to the next slide, please, where you see the university. Oh, this is, and yeah, the next slide, right? Yeah. So now you see I'm sorry, if you go back one, please. Yeah, go back one. Okay, now forward one. Thank you. Okay, sorry, that was my error. So now we see investments from the University of Michigan. The first thing you should see is everything's shaded. You've got presence everywhere. Okay, this is atypical. Most institutions don't show up in every bubble. Now, I have bracketed some things in purple where your institution is slightly less than the average NIH investment, and some things in green where your institution is slightly more than the NIH investment. But again, remember, this is only NIH support. It does not include NSF support, DOE, DOD, industry, et cetera, et cetera. So if something is slightly less, it could very well be made up, But there are some things where you clearly are significantly more. If I can have the next slide, please. And so here, and this is a little bit more complex, but you love data, so I'm going to show you data. Instead of looking at the numbers of grants, which is just that, it's the numbers of grants, it doesn't tell you anything about the value added. What this does is it weights all of the publications as evaluated by the relative citation research index that NIH uses, which is a way of understanding the impact of a particular publication. And so if you aggregate all of those publications, look at all of the areas where the University of Michigan is way ahead of the average NIH effort. It's really quite remarkable. Okay, it's really quite remarkable. Now, if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, go. Okay, if we go up, yeah. So here's where you actually, and there's just some tremendous strengths in these areas. I don't know what they're about. No doubt the provost does. But look at, there's just lots of strengths everywhere. It's really quite a testament to your faculty, Lori. Next slide, please. And then this is the clinical impact of research project grants. And as I had mentioned, if you go to the right of this, the middle, that's where most of the clinical stuff is. And so most everything is lighting up on the right-hand side. And again, whatever your orthopods are doing or your cancer people are doing, it's like way ahead, as is learning, cognition and so forth, as well as you might imagine, pathogenesis, antimicrobial resistance, and so forth. So the reason I showed this, you can go next, please. And I think, yeah, next, please. Yeah, is just to sort of give you a sense of what you can do with big data analytics. And the good news is that we're going to be releasing in beta form a tool that will allow you to sort of do these types of analyses on your own if you're not already doing them with your own homegrown systems. But I did want to, close by just pointing out, the incredible strength that your institution has leading in multiple areas. And with that, I will stop, and hopefully there's a little time for some questions and comments. Oh, wait, this is an advertisement. Very, very important. It's the only advertisement I'm making. There is an RFI, a request for information, about how people are thinking about postdoctoral training. If there are any postdocs on this call or any supervisors of postdocs, please take a look at this RFI and respond to it. We have a working group of the advisory committee to the director. It doesn't close until mid-April. We really want to hear from you as we are trying to figure out the way forward related to postdoctoral education. Okay, with that, I will stop and you can go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tabak. I think was a perfect presentation for learning health systems. You talk about policies, you talked about research, you talked about integration with data. It's not only like we think about it, it's like putting to application. So with that, we start with questions and answers. We have around 10, 12 minutes, and I'll start the process. So one of the questions. So when we talk about learning health systems, we talk about technology that to demonstrate that is a lot so new, like almost science fiction of new devices, new technologies, algorithms, and repositories, how to manage the data and collect the data. And the second part, which is the most important in this case too, is the behavioral part, is the stakeholders. In this case, the researchers, entrepreneurship, because you have also companies that are investing in new ideas. So you just release, we put into effect the data management and data sharing policy. So can you tell us in these two sides, one is the technology part and the other one, the behavioral part, what are the hurdles? What are the things on the next step in for this data sharing policy?
Yeah, well, I mean, technically, I think we have solutions to most, but perhaps not all of the different types of data sets. And everybody will sort of comment that their type of science is a little different, and so may need different care and feeding, if you will. But I think, we used to say this about images, oh, how can we store so many images? I think people have now figured out, the right way of doing this in most instances. I think the technical hurdles are overcomable. It's the second portion of your comment. It's getting people accustomed to the notion that, oh yes, I'm supposed to do this, for all the reasons that I mentioned today. And we have now this requirement, and we think, having spoken about it for a few years, that it should not have come as any surprise to anybody. But I can tell you, my inbox tells me a different story. Apparently, a lot of folks just weren't paying attention and so forth. Well, at least everybody's paying attention now. I think we're going to get there. I think, at the local level, I know institutions have come up with approaches. This is solvable. And if somebody has a use case for which there is no solution, I wish they would let us know about that, because that, we'll all learn from that, and in trying to figure out, what the solution is for that unique use case, we'll move things forward even further. So I think we just got to get everybody accustomed to this. And I know at the local level, chairs and deans and provosts are trying, and certainly here on a national level, we're trying to get everybody in sync. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tabak. I have here like several questions, and I'll try to keep, be really fast. But one of the questions is Sepide Banava. So although data science and analytics has progressed exponentially in the past few years, yet data science related grant applications in dentistry are not funded with the same pace. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I guess depending upon what the nature of the work is, you may want to consider positioning it for funding from an institute in addition to NIDCR. For example, the Common Fund has had some efforts in AIML and data science, which are agnostic with regard to disease and condition. And so that might be a place that you might contemplate. Also, the National Library of Medicine is engaged in this space. And so whilst you may think that the NIDCR is the natural home, and it might be, okay, but in sort of positioning yourself, you may want to branch out a little bit, and maybe that sets you up for the possibility of co-funding, where more than one institute will collaborate, to support the work. I think, as time goes on, you will see more and more data science related applications funded across all of NIH. And I don't think the Dental Institute will be any different.
Yeah, I have another question here for Dr. Luisa Sevidanis, part of our School of Dentistry at the University of Michigan. With the new DMS requirements, how is NIH ensuring data provenance, privacy protection, and curation? Is the infrastructure to support cloud-based repositories and data management available for each NIH institute? And this is a good question because we are seeing multidisciplinary efforts. So when we, in my work in the DCI, in the NDS, and several institutions, so how that is playing at NIH?
Yeah, so we're trying to get everybody to play nice, as you might imagine. And some institutes and centers have taken advantage of the Strides initiative, where we do have these cloud resources available, some discounts in storage, compute time, also many tools and training available. Not all the institutes and centers are there quite yet, but our hope is that eventually they will all be. And these are equities that you can make available to extramural investigators, and many have. And so I would hope that over time we get more and more adoption. Built within that cloud environment are the sorts of things that the questioner, is outlining, the tools that you want to use to ensure privacy, et cetera. But we're still in a uptake phase of adoption, and we're not quite there 100%. Just as all of the institutions around the country are in different phases of adoption, but with time we're going to get there.
Yeah, I have another question from Sujan Samantha. What efforts, vision, and resource mobilization are in action within NIH to help AI-enabled projects? Specifically, are there any AI-based projects considering the context of providing integrated healthcare by connecting medical and dental records?
So the projects that I'm most familiar with, I've come through the Office of Data Science, ODSS, the AIM Ahead project, which is a national consortium, which is really looking at the use of AI in an ethical way to empower interrogation of electronic health records. Now, whether somebody will take it upon themselves to apply to that program with the express purpose of trying to integrate medical and dental efforts. I'm unaware that anybody has done that yet, but that would be a place to start. There's also Common Fund initiative in creating gold standard data sets. And what better gold standard data set than the electronic health record that includes both medical and dental records. So I'm throwing down the challenge to you all.
So I have several questions here, but I'm going to ask the last one, and we move into the breakout room sessions. So this is from Dr. Wenshi. This is a COI of the Forsyth Center and Institute in Boston, and also a speaker for one of the breakout room sessions here. In the field of dentistry, it is the insurance companies that have all the data. How NIH could promote to make this data accessible for research purposes?
Yeah, nice to see the question from you. People are monetizing their data. And what NIH needs to do is we need to provide incentives that will, allow people in these companies and those who use these companies to think, oh, wait a minute, if we make our data available to everybody, what are the advantages gained? What is the value gained? I think, some people have even gone so far, although I don't agree to it, to say that, we should just blanket pay for all these data. But I don't think the NIH budget is large enough. So I think as individuals engage with, various third-party vendors and so forth, they should think about the long game rather than the short game. Because I think the long game is that if you are able to mine those data and combine them with colleagues at other institutions, ultimately you will wind up with something far more valuable than just your own data alone. And I hope that will drive, sort of a rethinking of this rush to monetize everything, which we're seeing both with medical records as well, of course.
Thank you, Dr. Tabak. Unfortunately, we have to move for a breakout room session. This was amazing event. Thank you very much for the questions, the work organizers of this event. I would like to let you know that you all receive an email with the link to the breakout room sessions with great speakers. There are 3 sessions here. One in the learning health system and entrepreneurship with Dr. Shi from the Forsyth Institute and Dr. Balaban from Overjet. Myself in the medical dental integration breakout room session 2, and also with Dr. Walji and talking about big mouth data. And also the third one with Lucia Sevidanis in imaging data integration sharing, and Amy Pasternak in pharmacogenomics. This is image and pharmacogenomics breakout room session. All the slides, the video we're going to be shared with in the future with everyone registered. So we're going to have in this room someone to help you to go to your breakout room session. With that, we wait for you for more and more technical information, exciting research, exciting and great speakers. Thank you very much, Dr. Tabak, and thank you very much for all of you during the keynote speak session. See you soon at 1:15 at one of the 3 breakout room sessions.